Today, I'm going to be talking about Family Guy theories. There are many theories on the hit TV show that range from outrageous to actually plausible. I'd like to speak about one that's close to my heart. Why is it so close to my heart? Because I came up with it. As far as my research can tell, and trust me, I scoured the internet looking for my exact theory, and I've had no luck. Although, I will say that other popular theories definitely share the underlying themes of mine, which I'll get to later on. So without further ado, here's my take on why Brian and Stewie not only never return from outside the space-time continuum, but why Brian and Stewie are the architects of the entire McFarlane universe, and possibly the entire universe as we know it. So let's dive into the episode that started it all, The Big Bang Theory. I'm going to lightly delve into the plot here for anyone that hasn't seen the episode, or for anyone that is a bit fuzzy on it. In this episode, we see Stewie come downstairs to talk to Brian about what to order from his magazine. Brian responds with a joke about Stewie's undecided homosexuality by pointing to the man on the magazine and declaring that Stewie is ordering him. Stewie then comes back at Brian with a dry insult, following with Brian laughing at its lack of quality and walking away. This event is the event that sets the entire plot and future of the universe in motion. Stewie immediately thinks of a clever insult he should have said instead, cursing that he couldn't just go back in time and redeem himself, then immediately realizing that he indeed has a time machine. Now, if you don't know that Stewie has a time machine, this likely isn't a video for you. Stewie's use of the time machine and various other fantastic technologies is the cornerstone of what I like to call Phase 3 of the Family Guy universe, and very arguably the best phase of Family Guy. However, that is definitely also another video for another time. Anyway, now we see a montage of Stewie going back in time and winning every fight or banter with Brian, undermining him, and then just plainly screwing him over. Although I love the science fiction of Family Guy, I will say that they are extremely fluid with the use of the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is the idea that a small change in the past, like the swoop of a butterfly's wings in a different direction, could lead to insanely different outcomes in opposition to current reality. But Family Guy's fluidity with this concept actually helps me prove my theory even more. So somehow Brian ends up finding out on his own that Stewie's been messing up with the timeline to make him look bad. But he confronts Stewie inside the time machine as he's preparing for another journey. This then leads to an argument followed by a fight over the controls of the time machine, in which a bunch of wrong buttons are pressed and the time machine activates towards some unknown destination. This action then teleports Brian and Stewie outside the space-time continuum. Now, what the space-time continuum is a valid scientific theory. It's simply referencing the three dimensions we live in and what our universe is made up of. The laws of physics, the dimensional level we can perceive, and so on. So outside the space-time continuum, we would see no universe laws, no dimensional laws, no physics, nothing. Stewie realizes this quite quickly as he's floating around with Brian, and he explains this by presenting Brian with a few impossible tasks. One where they sing the infamous Heart and Soul together, as is the running joke. Brian is of course amazed, but both of them don't seem too keen on staying. They immediately want out, which is understandable. Stewie then explains that his return pad could create an explosion, which could potentially propel them back into the universe. Now, there's a few things wrong with that, but we'll get into that much later. This may be a long video analysis. So as all 20-minute runtime plots progress, they are successful in returning home. But a day later, Stewie shows Brian that they were in a temporal causality loop, which is a time loop that creates the already existing events that created the ability to create the time loop, and so on. So simply put, the grandfather paradox. The idea that if I go back in time to kill my grandfather, he won't exist to have my father, and for my father to have me, meaning I couldn't go back in time to kill him, which means I am still born, so I can still kill him to not exist, and so on. An action that wasn't part of the timeline paradoxically becomes a factor in that timeline before it existed. Time travel theories can definitely be a mind-boggler. I highly suggest checking out channels like Vsauce, Veritasium, Kyle Hill, and a multitude of other channels that go into time travel quite specifically. I'm naming my favorite channels, of course, but there's a lot of material out there on the subject, and I can't even wrap my head around the things I'm saying. Anyway, back to the video. So, Stewie's now aware and telling Brian that his explosion outside the space-time continuum was the Big Bang that started the universe. Through a paradox, Stewie created the universe, with Brian being the Art Garfunkel of the universe. Sorry, Art. And with the rest of this episode, just typical Family Guy antics involving Stewie's mortal enemy, Bertram, which we should keep noted here. It'll be relevant in a bit. So, what does this exactly mean for the Family Guy universe? Well, we never really hear anything about this again. It kind of boils down to a 20-minute runtime sci-fi plot. Stewie and Brian are just fine, and life goes back to normal. But it isn't really normal, is it? Well, let's first examine when Stewie makes his attempt to get back home from outside the Continuum. So, after Stewie explains what's happened to them, they do their musical number. This sends them on a tangent about how good they are and how they wish there were people around to see this. This is the first incentive I will use to argue that they never went home. I'll explain why this makes sense. Stewie's character usually revolves around the idea that he doesn't fit in with the world around him. He's far too smart and cultured to bond with anyone other than figments of his imagination. Rupert, or a writer like Brian. There's even an episode later on dedicated to the concept that Stewie wishes he was never born. His entire character screams the idea that Stewie doesn't want to be home. He wants to stay. Brian's character is a depressed alcoholic that can't make it as a writer and tries so hard to be admired or find a characteristic that will make him worthy. Brian doesn't want to go home either. Home is where he binge drinks and gets crapped on by the world. Now, not to glorify Brian, he's definitely egocentric in many ways, but he does have redeemable qualities. So starting here, I think we can make a somewhat plausible case that if Stewie and Brian could stay in a place where they can do anything and be anything, they likely wouldn't want to leave this place. So we've laid the framework, let's connect the dots. If Stewie and Brian never left the Continuum, this would mean that the entire Family Guy universe was created by them. And because their causality loop allows them to be the creators of what created them, they created Family Guy right from season 1. Not only does this explain the defiance of reality and physics we see during cutaways or just basic scenes, but it explains why Family Guy has gotten progressively crazier in its disconnect from reality. Assuming that Brian and Stewie are co-creating this universe together, we can see Brian's progression as a writer. To create this universe to live in would be his dream come true. He starts out being tied close to reality in early seasons, and then gradually seeks more out of it because of boredom. Not only does this explain why none of them age, because everything is created by Brian and Stewie in their image, but it explains why Brian can talk and Stewie is a super genius. Now, if you're asking how that's possible, that they created their own abilities to be smart and genius, remember that they're a paradox. They are a loop. There was never a what came first scenario. This is infinite, meaning that according to mathematics and the principles of a paradoxical causality loop, it is perfectly justifiable as to why Brian and Stewie can both talk and have hyperintelligence for what they are. So, if anyone ever asks you how a dog and a baby can talk on Family Guy, just say that they are all a never-ending paradoxical construct of time manipulation and interdimensional travel. They'll be sure to understand, and all their questions will be resolved. Now, if you're skeptical about how Brian and Stewie could do all this by themselves, please refer to Rupert. Rupert is Stewie's bond to infancy, really his only bond. Through imagination, Stewie created Rupert to be a talking person with a personality. He obviously has the ability to have in-depth relationships through imagination with inanimate objects. Why not a grander scale? Now, if you're saying, hey, if they design their own selves anyway in a loop, how is Stewie's imagination ability justification for any of this? To that I say, if you deny this entire theory and accept that Stewie just has a hyperactive imagination, then it is reasonable to say that his ability to do things with his imagination is probably much more than the average person's. Who's to stop him from conjuring an entire city in his liking with Brian? The wicked thing with this theory is that nothing has to make sense for it to make sense, because it's a loop with an infinite cycle. Anything is justifiable once you lay that groundwork. Alright, now let's kick it up a notch. Now, one thing I want to get into right before we look at the even bigger picture is that if we accept that Stewie and Brian never left the Continuum, the first thing Stewie created was the idea that Leonardo da Vinci was his direct bloodline, which makes sense because Stewie wants so bad to be part of a grander picture of intelligence. Then conjures an epic fight with his mortal enemy. Seems like something a child would dream up. And then actually becomes Leonardo da Vinci to make up for the timeline shift to preserve his life, which has some major flaws in its own. Apparently, Stewie and Leonardo da Vinci have exact matching DNA, so the timeline stays without any consequence? That's a major hole in this logic. It sounds more like Stewie created this all in his head and everything turns out okay. Don't you think? This explains why every episode ends with the situation resolving itself, and it also explains one of the greatest Family Guy plots to date, Brian's death. That's right. We've seen in the episode Doggone that Stewie faked Brian's death in order to show Brian that the family cares about him. This is a major ego trip for Brian. It would make sense for a writer with egocentric views in a universe where he's God to kill himself and watch it play out, only to return when his satisfaction was enough. So let's look at the bigger picture. Well, the bigger picture is actually pretty freaky. Because Stewie and Brian are the creators of the Family Guy universe, that definitely doesn't stop them from creating American Dad. But what's stopping them from creating us? That's right, us. We are the product of Stewie's hyperactive imagination and Brian's writer's brain. Is it any coincidence that The Big Bang Theory aired on May 8th, 2011, mere months before 2012, the supposed end of the world? Remember that? People were losing their minds. But as we know, based on the 2020 reality we're all living at the time this video releases, this world is messed up. Mandela effects and rogue governments, insane things, climate change, severe everything, a deadly virus. It's like someone turned the world into a movie plot that gets progressively worse. And it started in 2012 at the hands of Brian, a cliche-stealing crappy writer, and Stewie, a science-loving, chaos-loving genius. That's right. The world you live in today, the gods you should be worshipping right now, are Stewie and Brian Griffin, the lords of the entire universe as we know it, and everything in it. All hail Stewie, all hail Brian. Stewie finally got his wish, world domination, and Brian finally got his wish, praise in the highest degree, because Brian is a good dog, and Stewie has great fashion sense. I would never say anything bad about Brian and Stewie. Never. Oh god. Oh god. They're here. They're here. They know I know. They know I know. I've become self-aware. They know I know. Don't show this video to anyone. If you know, they will come for you. No. Stay back. Stay back. Hey everyone, if you liked this video and want to see more of whatever content this is, just leave your comments and criticisms down below. I would love to hear your own expansion on this theory, or your own theories. And remember, Sunday is Stewie Worship Day. Cheers.